Welcome to another Big Daddy D adventure. Today we're going to be building some modular work tables. I've seen a bunch of different videos online and done a lot of research on them, and all the ones I saw were either very complicated or the legs seemed very thin. So I came up with my kind of mixed design between heavy duty work table and lightweight efficient modular tables, and came up with this design. So what the biggest key about this one is the legs. Again, I wanted a heavier duty leg than I saw, but I also wanted it to be simple. So with the table height set at 36.5 inches, I was able to get all of the 2x4 pieces, which are all the frame structure, to come out of 6 8-foot 2x4s. Basically, there's 4 legs and then an upper frame and a lower frame. The upper frame will hold the tabletop, and the lower frame will hold a shelf, and it also stiffens the lower part of the leg. Well, on the bottom of each of the legs, I'm actually going to put a little 3/4 inch pad, and I just wanted that 3/4 inch pad at the bottom because I'm going to be adding some leveling feet, and then maybe in the future I might kind of upgrade this to putting casters on it. But I also wanted to highlight, I made a crosscut sled in the last video, and just wanted to show off how well it works. I'm able to use my 1, 2, 3 block, push it up against the stop that I measured that one piece to, pull the 1, 2, 3 block out, and then cut the piece. And it was just so quick, so effortlessly done. I was really impressed. I really enjoyed working with this crosscut sled. Well, before putting the legs together, again, each leg is going to consist of 2 2x4s. But yeah, this looks like a future project for me. I might need to get a zero clearance sled for my crosscut saw. I had quite a bit of tear out on these 2x4s, so just having to sand up the ends a little bit before I start screwing them together. Well, let's start screwing the legs together. What I did is I put one of my little wood clamps on the edge of my table here. Again, the only table I have for my shop right now is this little 2 foot by 3 foot metal table that I used to do welding on. But soon I'll have some bigger tables with these tables. But again, just putting these 2 boards at 90 degrees, putting a clamp at one end, putting a clamp on the other end, making sure everything is lined up. Again, one edge to the one face, and then clamping it down and throwing 3 screws in it. And that is a rinse and repeat for the 8 legs for these 2 tables. I feel like this design of this leg is a lot stiffer than just counting on a single 2x4, but also a lot simpler than trying to go with a big 4x4 leg and trying to cut a mortise into it. So here we go. So now it's time to put the frames together. There's essentially going to be one frame at the top and then one frame at the bottom. And then after I put the frames together, then I'll screw the legs to the frame. And here what I'm doing is I'm just drilling and countersinking all the screws. I'm putting 2 screws. I think I'm using 2.5 inch number 9 screws, construction screws. And I'm putting 2 screws at the end of each of these boards. Again, I'm screwing the long boards into the short boards for making up this frame. Now that I have those pilot holes drilled, I'm going ahead and running some screws in here. That way I don't have to fiddle with it when I'm trying to put it together. And again, pilot drilling those screw holes, again, just helps the boards from splitting on the end since these screws are so close to the end. Again, one of the luxuries of not having a table is I'm quite often working on the floor, but all in all, this worked out pretty good. The first one was quite challenging to put together, but putting these second boards on wasn't too bad. And fortunately, I only have 2 of these frames to build for this first table that I'm building. So next step is to mount these leg assemblies into the top frame. Think about this as actually flipped upside down. And the way the boards are arranged, I actually have 2 screws going into the long board and then 1 screw going into the short board. Again, I think that's enough to keep these points from racking, and then strong enough to hold the top up. So I'm also having to pilot drill these screw holes again, because they're really close to the top edge of these boards. Again, I didn't want the board to split out. Also on the top's going to be resting on the frames, but also resting on the top of the leg, so the weight's distributed between the leg and the frames. I've also added clamps. I don't know if you can see here, but I've added clamps in both directions. I wanted to make sure that those boards are sucked up to those corners real tight before I screwed them in. I didn't want to have to pull the boards, or if it had introduce any racking when I'm screwing this top piece in. So now I'm going to assemble the bottom frame onto the bottom of the legs. Here I just wanted to point out where I actually made marks all the way around where I want the top of the shelf. And then I clamped on some boards to kind of act as stops. That way I didn't have to kind of fiddle with, am I at the right level while I'm trying to screw these things together. And then again, after I got it set down, then I just went ahead and ran some clamps onto these blocks just to kind of suck those two pieces together and make sure I'm at the right spot. And just like the top frame assembly where it gets attached to the legs, again, ran pilot holes where I could for all the screws. And then after that, I'm putting 2 screws in the long side and 1 screw in the short side where they attach to the frames. Now we're on to mounting those pads that I'm putting on the bottom of the legs. Again, all I'm using this pad for is a little extra stiffness. I was kind of worried that when I'm putting these riser or leveling feet on, that I might have a tendency to splitting out the end of that 2x4. Again, drilling out a 1/2-inch hole in the end of that 2x4. I was kind of worried about it splitting if I got too much weight or if I was pushing on it sideways. So I added these 3/4-inch blocks, and then I'm going ahead and running this 1/2-inch drill into the corner sections. That's where I'm going to go ahead and tap in those leveling feet. And pretty simple mounts. I think they went in real good, and they also work really good. Being on this outer edge, I was able to just reach down with my fingers and adjust them when they weren't level. So the one last thing to make this a usable table that I can go ahead and build the next modular table on is to mount the top. And what I'm doing here is I just set a little board up there to give me an idea how thick that 2x4 is. Then I'm using this countersink, and I wanted to point out that I'm using this little collar around the countersink. It's just a drill set collar, but it's the size of the countersink. And it worked out real good because I just pushed it down to the collar head, and then I was able to get the same countersink on all these holes and just pushed to flush, and then it worked out really good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and speed through making this second table, but having this first modular table was so nice. It has a much nicer work height than my other table, and it's a pretty good size area, this 2x4 area. Even though it's just one table in this configuration, it really helped the process to making the second table. Yeah, not having to crawl around on the floor to get this table top frame mounted to the top of those legs was so nice. Having it at a nice height. Just sat up on the other table. Again, in the end, we'll have 2 modular tables. So if I ever work on something that's a little bigger than is 2x4, I can actually just put the other 2 of them together in multiple different configurations. But working on the bottom shelf configuration still is pretty easy to put it on the floor. So again, set up the stop blocks with the clamps as I did last time. Screwed everything together, and then went ahead and mounted those little blocks on the corners and installed the feet. And the top shelf gets installed the same way as the other shelf. So the bottom legs, I had to notch this bottom shelf, again using a piece of 1/2-inch plywood on these. I had to notch the shelves around the legs so that I could just drop the piece of plywood in and get as much contact around that perimeter frame as possible. Marked up one board, then clamped it to the other table board, and then used it as a template to mark out the second one. Worked out pretty good. I did want to highlight one technique I'm using here to cut out those complex shapes with my jigsaw. What I did is I ran a 1/2-inch drill bit right at that intersection of the 2 center pieces, or the center cuts. And that way I was able to drop the saw down into that hole and then start those cuts without having to mess around with too much trouble. With those corners cut off, I was able to drop those lower plywood in on those frames, and then just used a countersink, and then put some screws in, a few of them on the front, a few of them on the back, and then I think one on each side. Worked out pretty good. So although I plan on using the leveling feet in normal operation, I went ahead and wanted to try some of these quick release removable casters here on the bottom of this table. I may try it out for a while and see how it looks, see how it works. If it works out well, then I might put them on a couple of the other tables. Again, what I wanted to do is have it to where I could, roll these things around as needed, but I didn't want to have that big chunk of steel sticking out. So these are removable casters. We'll try it for a while and see how it looks. So although these are modular tables, I want to have the ability to kind of bolt them together. So what I'm doing here is using a 5/8 inch bit and drilling holes on 1 foot center. So the long sides get 3 holes and the short sides get 1 hole. And then that way I'm able to use, I think I'm using a 3/8 bolt, about 5 inches long, with some washers. And then that way I'm able to bolt them together end to end, put one bolt in them, tighten it down, and it'll lock these two tables together. Or I'm able to mount them side by side to make a 2 foot by 4 foot square table. Or I'm able to mount them where it's an L, either on one side or the other, or even a T right in the middle. So it gives me a lot of flexibility if I want to put these tables together in different configurations for whatever project I have that comes up. And lastly, the main reason why I made my tables 36.5 inches tall was that I wanted to also be able to use as an outfeed table for my table saw. So it'll make my table saw a little safer and just more useful around the shop. Well, thanks for coming on another workshop project adventure with me today. As usual, if you like what you saw, give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to go on more project adventures with me, hit the subscribe button. As always, take care. Bye-bye.